Try to understand this land, Australia. Take her as she is, her moods, her mysteries. Mother of us all, beneath the Southern Cross, in her frame of peaceful seas. Try to understand this land, Australia. Take her as she is, her moods, her mysteries. Mother of us all, beneath the Southern Cross, in her frame of peaceful seas.
Early morning in the snowy mountains in southeastern Australia. This is one way to see some of the most rugged and beautiful country in Australia. When the engine of Barry Renford's power glider is switched off, he can glide above the eagles and the mountain tops for hours.
The mountains themselves, you can see them all spread out beneath you because they run right north up to Canberra, and you can actually easily see the Victorian Alps down to the south, and it's magic.
Ever since the glaciers of the last ice age drew back thousands of years ago, people have been coming to the Snowies to test themselves and to challenge the mountains. This is the way most of the visitors get to the Snowies. There are 3 entrances to Kosciuszko National Park. This is the main one.
Good morning. Just for the day, is it?
Thank you, yes.
There we go. Thank you.
Have a good day.
Enjoy your day.
This road runs from Jindabyne in the east to Charlotte's Pass, which is close to the highest point in Australia. From the east, the Snowies rise gradually, a series of ever higher ranges that finally give way to an alpine plateau. It's from the west, however, that the Snowies best reveal their scale. If Australia is the world's flattest and driest continent, then this is surely its most unlikely part. The Snowies are part of the Great Dividing Range, which separates the thin eastern coastal belt from the interior. They also form part of the natural boundary between the states of New South Wales and Victoria. If the peaks don't look very high, it's because the plateau is already over 2,000 metres, 6,000 feet. The peaks reach above that height, and the highest of them is Kosciuszko, 2,228 metres above sea level. Back in 1840, a Polish adventurer, Paul Strzelecki, climbed to this summit. He may not have been the first European to do so, but he did name our highest peak, and, for a fellow Pole, Tadeusz Kosciuszko. Strzelecki said the shape of the peak reminded him of Kosciuszko's tomb back in Poland. I think there was more to it than that. Kosciuszko was a famous freedom fighter, and, like so many who've come here since, Strzelecki could taste the freedom in this air.
The air is crisp and cold and incredibly sweet to breathe. And the weather can change like that in the wink of an eye, even in the middle of summer. The air's thinner and the temperature's appreciably lower. But this is the highest point in Australia. And on a clear day, you can see the world.
Not quite the Himalayas, but there's still some significance in climbing to the roof of Australia, the highest point between tropical New Guinea and the Antarctic. Strzelecki was one of the first to explore the outback and to find gold. And he was the first to see that in hot and dry Australia, the Snowies contained a treasure as precious as gold: water, locked up in winter ice and snow. Strzelecki came in the summer, when the high country was carpeted with wild flowers. They too make this country unique, the only true Alps on the whole Australian continent. Many of these plants grow nowhere else on Earth. Not only are they rare, they're remarkably fragile. Although they can survive vicious extremes of climate, they can be destroyed by nothing more than the pressure of human feet. By the time Strzelecki came, though, in 1840, the Alps were already under threat. Cattle and sheep had already found their way into the high country. These alpine pastures are sweet for stock, perfect summer grazing. Today, where now just the wild bush horses run, this fragile country's protected. It's a national park, but right through until recent times, summer grazing leases ran almost to the summit of Kosciuszko. But even the first drovers into the Snowies followed tracks that were older still.
Thousands of years before Europeans came to the country, Aboriginals came here every spring. They came from all directions. It was a gathering of the tribes. And do you know what they came for? Moths.
The bogong moth is a marvel of adaptation. Every summer, when the plains get too hot, they escape to the Alps. Here, literally in their millions, they seek out cool caves and crevices in the rock where they lie dormant, living off the rich protein stored in their abdomens.
Aboriginals came here to literally feast on the moths, and these caves and crevices are like larders, just full of rich protein.
These moth feasts were a time for enriching not just diet, but every aspect of tribal life. Many tribes shared the high country. This was the one time in the year when they all met up. Some of the biggest social gatherings in Aboriginal Australia took place here in the Snowies. All through summer, the crags rang with the whirring sound of the bull roarer, signalling the different stages of the corroboree. It was the time of friendship and feasting, a time for campfires and yarns and legends. Aboriginals no longer come for the bogong moth. Stockmen no longer range the high country. But snowy campfires are still a place for friendship, yarns, legends and songs.
You reckon you're away for weeks at a time, Snowy? I suppose you probably were on these droving trips. You used to ride home or not?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I heard the story that one of your daughters said, and if Dad hadn't come home for a fresh horse, he wouldn't have been there. Is that true? You're a bit of a boy when you got home.
Yeah.
Boyd Mould is one of the youngest men who can still remember the days when stockmen took big mobs of sheep and cattle into the high country. He first went up there as a boy of 4.
For some reason one day, I don't know what the reason was, I thought to myself, my kids aren't going to know what these mountains were like, because they've never been up there. You know, they'd remember me being up there for weeks at a time, remembering the big mobs that I'd bring home and they had to help me draft, things like that, and I thought that's going to be lost because they don't know, and their kids in turn, they won't know, and after that they probably never know that they're ever stock in the mountains. So I wrote a poem that I titled Where the Snowy Mountain Stockman Used to Ride. Well, my memory is fading now. I'm getting on in years. There are fragments of my life I can't recall. Many little things remind me of the years I've left behind me, but one vision lingers clearest of them all. I see how the country changes as the plains merge with the ranges and the foothills reach up to the Great Divide. I see mountains and clear streams most folk only see in dreams, up where the Snowy Mountain stockman used to ride. Now those men were hard as granite. They were resolute and tough, just as rugged as the ranges that they rode. Yet at night, around the fire, those men never seemed to tire of the mustering yarns those stockmen often told. But that era now has ended. All their grazing rights suspended, all the pack horse teams have long since been retired. But I always will remember the freedom and the splendour where those Snowy Mountain stockmen used to ride. It's not all a bed of roses, it's like any way of life. There are times you wish you'd never seen the place. When those winter winds start blowing and by night time it is snowing and the driving sleet's like gravel on your face, then the fog rolls in with darkness to complete the mountain's harshness, and you cannot see a hand before your eyes. So you leave it to your horse to select the homeward course to where your mates are waiting round the open fire. But the memories I will treasure are the hardships and the pleasures, a taste of hell and heaven side by side, of splendours quite amazing, and of sheep and cattle grazing up where the Snowy Mountain stockman used to ride.
Bush verse isn't the only tradition Snowy people are trying to keep alive. Snowy horsemanship has been legendary ever since Banjo Patterson wrote The Man from Snowy River. His poem tells of a chase after a thoroughbred horse which had escaped to the mountains. It was finally caught by a young stripling on a mountain pony. He was a fictional hero, but real-life Snowy Mountain riders have been trying to live up to his exploits ever since. This annual bush race meeting, the Lake Gillimatom Cup, is one way of doing that. And it's a day that isn't just for the old-timers or just men.
The mountain muster is a social gathering of the high country men and women that come here today together to show that the Snowy River Riders, as the legend has it, the renowned cattlemen, are still alive today and they're still enjoying their high country.
Many believe Banjo's poem was about a lot more than a horse race. Among the first white settlers in the Snowies was the family of Tom Barry.
I think the poem of The Man from Snowy River starts off with Banjo Patterson's tribute to the young men that he saw as the pioneers of Australia. He saw young men who went out and they took the risks that were necessary to achieve, and they achieved. But the Man from Snowy River was a very special man in so much as he was the real heart of the pioneers. He was the guy who, when everyone else stopped, when even Clancy took a pull, he went on, he took that extra risk, he gave that little bit extra, and he achieved more. And I think that was one of the things that made the pioneering of Australia what it was. I think the poem goes on further than that, though. I have a belief that poets often, sometimes without knowing it, are bits of prophets. And I believe that the poem of The Man from Snowy River can be related to Australia as a young fledgling nation, which it was at that time when Patterson wrote that poem. that was trying to take its place amongst the nations of the world and was yet to prove itself. Well, my old man said that the three things that were necessary was a big heart, a damn good wife, and at least a blunt axe. And you needed those things just to make a start.
In the Snowies, occasions like this really do bring the generations together, and the respect for the skills of the older generation is noticeable. Preparations for this event have been going on for weeks. Horses have to be in top shape, well shod and fit. Every year, the people of the Snowies have what they call their Man from Snowy River Awards. Horsemanship is part of it, but only part. It's mainly a way of saluting people who've given a lot to the community. Mick Pendergast is a previous winner of the award. Like Tom Barry, Mick is a descendant of the first white settlers into the Snowies. He went droving in the high country, back in the days when sheep and cattle and wild mobs of horses roamed the high plains, and another human being wouldn't be seen for weeks on end. One year, Mick Pendergast was up there for 3 months, without a break, shepherding his sheep.
Used to have about 2,000. And the old fellow was a pretty good shepherd, the old boss fellow that was with me.
Yeah.
He always had pretty good all-round dogs.
And what would you do at night?
Well, I asked that question a lot. What did you do with your spare time? But by the time you got your sheep in, had a feed, it was getting late and then you'd have to cook a damper each night for the next day.
And were you lonely?
Well, you sort of didn't have time to get lonely.
Legally at this race meeting there's no betting, but if you can get set, have a few bob in the stripling. So with the finish of the Jillamatong Cup, the spirit and heritage of the Snowy Mountain Riders lives for another year. Tumut, 100 kilometres downstream from Kosciuszko. Back in 1852, the old town of Tumut had been built down here on the river flats. That winter, a raging flood fed by the alpine snow swept through Tumut.
When the water cleared, the old town had gone. So had the lives of 50 people. It proved that the rivers of the Snowies shouldn't be underestimated. As far back as 1840, Paul Strzelecki had suggested taming the Snowies for irrigation. So it seems fitting that his statue stands where it does, looking towards the mountain he put on the map and across the man-made lake at Jindabyne. This really is the end of the road. The bridge that used to be here across the Snowy River at Jindabyne was blown up in 1967. When they drowned the road, they also drowned the town of Old Jindabyne. But unlike Tumut, it was drowned by design as part of a grand dream. Back in 1949, the Australian government created a special task force, the Snowy Mountains Authority. Its job was to tame the Snowies. It was a staggering challenge, yet it could only be considered because the Snowies were already something very close to a natural miracle. If water is our lifeblood, you could fairly call this Australia's heart. The snow melt is the secret. The Snowy River, which flows east to the sea, rises here, and so do two great western inland flowing rivers, the Murray and the Murrumbidgee. In its natural state, the Snowy gets too much of the water, the west flowing rivers too little. But without the slow, steady snowmelt, they might not run in summer at all. The Snowy Mountain scheme was designed to turn these fast-flowing rivers back on their tracks, to water the inland and to make power along the way. It turned the entire Snowy Mountains region into a huge machine. Imagine a huge machine spread across 5,000 square kilometres of wilderness, designed to operate night and day, summer and winter, for 100 years. A machine whose vital parts include hundreds of kilometres of mountain roads, pressure pipelines, bridges, aqueducts, 7 power stations, 17 major dams. Vast underground chambers to hold 2 of the power stations that lie at its heart, and 150 kilometres of hard rock tunnels. Most of the machine is underground. It has to be, to make the water flow where it doesn't want to, under Australia's highest mountains. In the high country, dams like Tumut Pond, Island Bend, Guthiga are the pressure tanks on the roof. Lower down are the man-made lakes, Jindabyne and Eucumbene, big enough to hold the entire annual runoff of the Snowies. The machine makes enough power to run the world's largest city. Redirects enough water to bring new life to arid land. The dam walls show the scale of the scheme. The dams themselves show its beauty. The scheme took 25 years to build and was visited by royalty and politicians. It was finished on budget, ahead of time. Within its projected lifetime, sales of power will pay back the total cost. Not a bad achievement. There was a time, of course, when the Snowy Mountains project was not so much a scheme as a dream. When work started, most of the high country was not only unmapped, it was largely untracked. The first survey teams went into the mountains the same way the cattlemen always had. Behind them came a civilian army. Roads were driven so crawling 36-wheelers could bring in giant equipment and haul out whole towns from valleys that would soon be flooded. scheme took more than machines. It needed manpower and skills Australians didn't have. The authority launched a massive recruiting drive in Europe. In a few years, it brought tens of thousands of people to the region. Men and women of no less than 30 nations came to work in the Snowies. It was a time when many fleeing from post-war Europe were anxious to find a home and peace. So within this huge multicultural workforce, a tremendous pride and camaraderie developed, and these men became, without doubt, the best construction team in the world at that time.
We were the best at the time. We were considered to be the elite, and I guess we deserved that. I suppose we considered ourselves a cut above the rest. They were good times.
Night and day, summer and winter, for 25 years, trucks roared, rumbled, slithered, grumbled up precipitous mountain roads. Mud, snow and ice made conditions worse. Yet impossible deadlines were not just met, but beaten. Dams they said couldn't be built in 4 years were finished in 2. Hard rock tunnellers broke world records. Then they broke their own records. Tunnelling was the most dangerous work of all, especially for the dignitaries who witnessed the last historic blast. Someone, it seemed, put an extra bit of jelly in the chards to give the ceremony a bit of a lift. But it was hard work in tough conditions. Many of the men who built the scheme came straight from post-war refugee camps that didn't seem much different. Camps that today are no more than memories for those that lived here. People like Ulick O'Boyle and Frank Rodwell. Frank Rodwell calls them the lost cities of the Snowies.
So, Frank, who lived round here, the married men or the wild ones like Ulick?
No, they had houses here. There were families.
Yeah.
And they had houses set up along here, transportables that they brought in on the back of trucks. And when they no longer required the town here again, they just picked them all up, took them with them.
How many would have been here at the biggest?
It would have been less than 1,000 people. We didn't have any town or camp in the whole of the area that had more than 1,000 people in it. So a few less than 1,000 people.
Frank Rodwell lived in these makeshift tent towns as a young man. He spent all his working life on the Snowy scheme and is still part of the organisation known today as the Snowy Mountain Hydroelectric Authority.
They put in tremendous gardens here. They worked on those gardens, little prize-winning gardens. There was, each Christmas, they decorated that hall better than anything you'd like to see in Sydney, probably. And animated cutouts, the lot. They just got right into it. There was certainly pride there too. The camps that were set up were run exactly along the army styles, right from duckboards, tents. It came straight out of the army manual, those early camps. I know that I've put newspapers between my blankets at night time and in an effort to keep warm. Because we were in snow huts and tents up here and there was no heating at all. And I've had my plates freeze together solid beside my bed, and you've got to run them under the hot water in the morning before you put your breakfast on them.
It was the snow and intensely cold weather conditions that made this project so unusual in Australia, known even then for its sun and sandy beaches. It took migrants a bit by surprise. However, many of them consider their days here the most exciting in their lives. Among them was Ulick O'Boyle.
It was one of the best times of my life, for certain, yeah. All the different nationalities, it was fascinating, you know, sort of an automatic and natural intermingling of cultures and customs and stories, you know. Of course, they had to learn English, it was harder for them. I'm more or less speaking.
Ulick ended up as a first aid officer and knows from gruesome experience how dangerous the miles of tunnelling under the mountains could be.
The guys were in the habit, and they weren't supposed to, of drilling into old buttholes left over from the previous firing, in which there might be some jelly left. And on occasions they did that and set off the jelly and, you know, lumps of rocks through their stomachs, chests, legs half sawn off. And then it was always dangerous when they were barring down, making the place safe for the next lot of drilling. You know, they had to bar down the loose rocks, then another loose rock might land on their helmets, because the helmets were built to split when they were hit with a rock. That was the idea, thereby absorbing the force. And sometimes you might get an occasion when the electricity didn't set off the charges. That was very nerve-wracking. Then it was total still outside, and how come it didn't blow? So then the chief electrician had to walk in all by himself after a suitable period and walk in and find out what had gone wrong, because apparently the power can run around in its own little directions for quite a while and then suddenly go off bang, yeah. But, you know, by and large, although they lost sort of, on average, a man a mile, for something the size of the Snowy scheme was relatively safe.
And like the Snowy Mountain men before them, Ulick and his mates created their own songs and ballads of these memorable years.
The mountains wore the winter snow like a fairy dress, while deep below I worked and watched a tunnel grow with Pedro. He taught me how to load that face with gelignite and how to pace my strength against that tunnel race, did Pedro. You can build a machine as big as you can, but you'll never push a tunnel without a man. We drilled and fired and the tunnel grew. We sweated for the bonus due. Lived it up when day was through with Pedro. For miners drink and miners fight, he'd do both and then he'd write a letter to his girl each night, would Pedro. Come to me, he wrote, Carmela, Carmela, come to me, come to me. One day when we were timbering ring, he said to me with a lazy grin, soon you know tunnel and everything like Pedro. Well, I turned around to crack a joke, but the rocket cracked and that roof it broke, and choked with dust I never spoke to Pedro. Just as I was moving clear for the second time, I tasted fear. More rocks came crashing very near to Pedro. Run, amigo, I heard him cry. The dust it cleared and I saw him lie. Beneath that rock we watched him die, Big Pedro. You can build a machine as big as you can, but you'll never push a tunnel without a man.
Winter brings a new tribe to challenge the mountain. This is Thredbo. It's just one of the snowy ski resorts, but it's probably the best known and most developed. European resorts may be older and better known, but this is still the site overseas visitors are most surprised to see in Australia: snow.
European resorts might be older and better known, but you can win money on this one. There's more snow in Australia than there is in Switzerland.
Thousands of Australians every year take advantage of all that snow. But appearances can be deceptive. Above the ski slopes lie the endless snow-filled valleys of the high plateau. Still a wilderness, and as skier and resort employee Phil Deere knows, a dangerous place.
The Australian Alps are an incredibly weather-affected environment. And I've seen weather come in here in 5 or 10 minutes, heavy cloud and then bright sunshine and heavy cloud again. And mountain environments anywhere in the world are quite changeable, but you're dealing with a high plateau in this country with nothing really higher than Kosciuszko between the Antarctic and New Guinea. So we get very high winds and we're very exposed to weather on the high plateau.
Dangers of a different kind also lie in the après ski activities. In the numerous chalets in the snow, skiers gather at night for a yarn, a song, and to commiserate on what was to be a more active holiday. The bars and restaurants have now replaced the traditional mountain meeting place around a campfire, the Aboriginals and stockmen of a previous time. Their purpose, however, is the same. Thredbo is a young resort, not only because young people come here, but because 30 years ago it didn't exist. Its discovery was made by a somewhat eccentric Czechoslovakian ski instructor, Tony Sponner. Tony still lives in the snow country with his friend, Olga.
So who's this one? It's Olga.
She's obviously had her ups and downs in life. Is she always in charge of room service nowadays?
Yes, now she's on this lift. She spent about 3 months sitting in my Ferrari.
So if we ordered a couple of cups of coffee, we could organise it, could we?
She can bring it up.
And she?
She can bring
black and 2 for me, Tony.
All right.
Like many ski veterans, Tony first came here to work on the snowy scheme. But he also looked at the high country slopes through skiers' eyes.
Very early after we arrived in the mountains, I looked around, especially when the first snow came, and I thought, well, where do they ski? It seemed to me too gentle. I was a champion skier at this stage, and I wanted some long crowns. Yes. And I knew there must be somewhere long crowns. And I started to look for them. At that stage, there was no chance of any road being built to Thredbo Valley, but I made several trips, some of them on horseback, and in due course I was able to select 10 different sites, which I thought were prospective sites for a village in the snow, which right from the beginning in my mind I called Thredbo.
There are older ski resorts than Thredbo in Australia, and it's fiercely argued which of these is best. The European style of all these resorts is fairly new, but people have skied in the Snowies for more than 100 years. In fact, Kyandra is said to be the site of the oldest ski club in the world. There's not much left of old Kyandra, and it doesn't seem to get the same heavy snowfalls it was once so famous for. But in the autumn of 1860, there were 10,000 people here digging for gold, living under canvas. As winter came, gold fever defeated common sense, and most of them decided to stay on. They were snowed into a closed world that was freezing cold and pretty short of gold. Frank Rodwell's great-grandparents were among them.
I don't know whether great-grandfather found any gold. If he did, he must have spent it because he didn't pass anything on. But that's where my grandfather was born. He was born in Kyandra on the 1st of August in a tent. And if anybody has been up in the Snowy Mountains area, during the winter time, they'll have a fair idea of what the conditions must have been like. To be actually living in a tent, but to give birth in a tent would be really something.
All the gold at Kyandra was being found down here by the creek. Until one day, a party of new chums arrived. 3 young Poms. "Excuse me," says one, "where do we find the gold?" "Why don't you young gents try up there, up on top of the hill?" says an old hand. They did, and you guessed it.
They found the mother lode that no one else had been able to discover. They went back to England rich men, and ever since, it's been called New Chum Hill.
A few hardy prospectors did hang on through the next winter, and they found a new way to amuse themselves.
What they'd do, they'd take an old piece of wood, perhaps a fence paling, cut one end to a point like this, turn up the end, bevel the underside, cut a groove in here to reduce friction, and then they would nail leather straps on here for their boots, and they'd have what they called Lapland shoes. And away they'd go, down the hill.
By the 1860s, they'd formed the ski club that claimed to be the first in the world. Their lodge was an old Goldfields store, and luckily, by the 1890s, one of their members was a professional photographer, Charles Kerry. Another member was a young Sydney lawyer, Banjo Patterson. It was while skiing at Kiandra that Banjo first met the high country stockman. Charles Kerry captured the high country with his camera. Banjo Patterson celebrated it with his pen. The Man from Snowy River and other poems tell of a place where the air is clear as crystal and the white stars fairly blaze at midnight in the cold and frosty sky.
But not everyone comes to the mountains in winter just for fun.
Jimmy James is an aqueduct patroller for the Snowy scheme. All the channels are vital feeders into the big dams down below. It's work that has to be done in winter, and Jimmy prefers to do it on skis.
I patrol the aqueduct system around here, and in fact there's 3 of us that do this, and the aqueducts are a number of concrete pipes that deliver water from the streams, creeks and rivers in this area and deliver them into the dams such as Guthaga and Island Bend. We're looking to make sure that we've got no leaks. We're making sure that there are no blockages on the trash racks to make sure that the water keeps flowing. There's no vandalism. We have a lot of rubbish in the winter time with plastic bags, rubbish like that very quickly block up the trash racks. I can't think of any job that would give me more pleasure than this, because I'm skiing the aqueducts in the winter time, and in the summertime I'm walking them, and they are 2 things that I really love doing. I can't think of a better job for me. I love the outdoors and I love the environment.
Holes that we got on the snow bridge down at the bottom of the Schnaxel.
Sandy Mahoney works on skis. She's a member of the Guthaga Ski Patrol. Sandy, her husband Mike and daughter Mindy are among only 20 permanent residents of Guthaga. Deepest in the snow and most remote of all the ski resorts.
It gets a lot busier, naturally, once the season gets on, which we would probably have like 250 people. But Melinda's the only child living here permanently. And the problem is to get her to school, and the closest school is Jindabyne, which is 40 kilometres away. Therefore, we need to get her from Guthaga to Jindabyne, and we take her by skidoo from Guthaga across the range up to Blue Cow, which she catches the tube, which is the train, down to Perisher, and then her school bus
new ones, do you?
Connects there at Perisher, and she'll go from Perisher down to Jindabyne. So it's a long day,
You got your homework?
but an enjoyable one. A lot of the children there envy the way she gets to school.
You have to rush. You make the train.
Okay.
It's a journey most kids would call a thrill ride. Nor does the novelty end at the station. If Mindy arrives just in time for the train, the truth is that the train arrived just in time for Mindy. In fact, the whole railway line came just in time for her first years at school. Both are part of the newest human assault on the Snowies. It's called the Ski Tube, and it's Australia's highest railway, an underground route to the top of the mountain. From below the snow line, Ski Tube links one of the Snowies' oldest resorts, Perisher, with the newest, Mount Blue Cow. More than a decade after the Snowy scheme was finished, the building of Ski Tube brought a new generation to face the same kind of challenge, the same pressure, the same rugged country. In just over a year, they drove a railway tunnel 8.5 kilometres to the top of the mountain. At 40 kilometres an hour, up a 1 in 8 grade, Ski Tube takes its passengers just about to the roof of Australia. Mount Blue Cow is above 2,000 metres. The snowfields today are more popular than they've ever been. Even so, most Australians have still never been skiing. Ski Tube and Mount Blue Cow may change that. For the first time, getting to the top is no longer a real challenge at all. Purists may disapprove, but it does mean more people than ever before will be able to enjoy, if not the challenge, at least the majesty of the Snowy Mountains. For thousands of years, people have come to the Snowies. They came looking for different things: bogong moths, summer pasture, gold, water, power, adventure. Whatever they came for, what people have always found here is personal challenge. Today, the mountain faces the greatest challenge. Just because so many people are drawn to the Snowies, the wilderness has come under threat. Most of the region is now national park. Regulations govern where you can go and how you travel, as they must. Rules and restrictions are a price of survival.
That's particularly true in the Snowies. In Australia, only 1,000th of 1% is truly alpine.
The high country wilderness is fragile, rare, and precious. But so are the friendships that have been forged around high country campfires. Out of the personal tests people have faced here have come some of our favourite yarns and legends. Those who challenged the Snowies have given us stories of courage and character, of enterprise and endurance. These too are rare and precious. The future will need wilderness. It will also need people who can face a challenge. To do that, they'll need to know the taste of freedom. For the future, finding out how to balance these sometimes conflicting demands is the real challenge of the mountain.
Try to understand this land, Australia. Take her as she is, her moods, her mysteries. Mother of us all, beneath the Southern Cross, in her frame of peaceful seas. The shimmer of the midday haze on endless inland plains. The busy city's bustling pace, the drenching life-filled rains. Try to understand this land, Australia. Take her as she is, her moods, her mysteries. Mother of us all, beneath the Southern Cross, in her frame